You're looking good, Drew. Very nice.
In today, This Week in AI by Empress Capital, we're going to look behind the scene on Elon Musk's data centers for Tesla, where they train Tesla's AI. We're going to hear about Anthropic, our favorite AI model, and what they're doing for the open source community. And we're going to talk a little bit about Alexa and how Yash is going to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning tomorrow. Stay tuned.
These discussions are proving to be quite interesting. I'm often having many investment calls either with investors or founders, and they're talking about around some of the discussions that we're having on these videos. So I'm enjoying it with that because I don't ever watch these, by the way. So it's nice to know someone is watching them, and if you are watching them, thank you. But I think, yeah, look, the point of what we're doing is to have discussions on where we could be going, and I think this is really interesting to further those discussions. So if you're ever watching these and we meet in real life, and that's what's happening more and more, is I'm meeting people for the first time and they've watched some of the videos and go, I'd love to talk more. And I think this is the point. AI is just impacting every area of our lives. And yesterday I had that specific conversation I'm talking about is someone looking at using AI in a religious way, and that was a new topic for me to look at how we integrate AI in certain ways there. And I think this is, like I say, it's every point we talk about relationships, now we're talking about religion, we talk about end of life, and we're talking about all these commercial ways, and so definitely very interesting. How about you, Draw? What's your thoughts on how you're seeing some of the discussions you're having with people?
I love the fact that it forces this conversation, this show forces me to stay on top of what's going on, and I think it has a huge value.
So speaking of which, what's been going on? I know you've had a few topics that you wanted to talk about today, so I'd love to kick off with some of those.
I'll start with something our friend Elon posted. Let me show the screen real quick. It's a video of inside one of the he calls it cortex, of course, a brain cortex. Giant new AI training supercluster being built by Tesla. So it's the noisiest thing ever. And this is the future of humanity. Look at this. This is AI. This is what AI really is, It's the guys over there. What I like I like the humans. Oh, there they are. Yeah, the humans fixing something. I love this. And if you go AI, if you just Google AI, look at images, and you have this kind of conception of AI, right? This is the concept. This is how we paint a picture of what it looks like and what it means, okay? And here's the reality of what it looks like and what it means. I just love it. I think it's an awesome demonstration of the gap.
I'm personally quite interested in where Tesla's going. I'm a big supporter, early investor, all of those sorts of things. And I think, in fact, October will be a really interesting discussion in the output of what that hardware is there being designed to do. And they're talking about their robo taxi. They're having this autonomy day again around that. And I think that'll be a pretty pivotal point for the company, good or bad, and how the markets will show that. But I think to me, this is at the backbone of whatever they're doing, and whether it be the robots, whether it be around that sort of self-driving side of things, this is all critical. They have a lot of data. They are, as a company, in terms of that self-driving side, they have the most real-world data, and so having this compute behind it, I think is what's necessary, and we're seeing this is going to keep growing.
So basically, you're excited by Tesla self-driving with the power of this Gen AI. I just don't think, I would say self-driving is not a Gen AI application.
I'm not saying Gen AI, but I am saying AI.
Yeah. It is an application. It is a learning, it's a machine learning type algorithms that you need, and you do need big, massive data centers like that for that, but it's just not Gen AI. Yeah, I think it's super interesting to have a picture to view of that kind of, that's the next layer, okay? So I think about it like computers, how they used to look like, huge, big rooms with rolling things. And now we're kind of back in that, right? The servers, the server farms, the AI clusters and so forth. That went full circle on that. And also, when computers became personal, the laptop was everything. The computing capabilities were in your desktop, the laptop, now than mobile. and then they're back again in this giant servers that do compute, but those things, they're not in the CPU level, right? So we kind of broke. So if the AI is the next level of computing, the next platform, then it's no longer another silicon innovation. It's this massive capabilities of reasoning that happens when you can hook all those CPUs together and run with weights, and we get a picture of how it looks, and it's really, I think it's very exciting to see it coming to life. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's probably relevant as well, talking about, I think Darren shared something with us, one of our partners in the fund, around Cerebras. I don't know if you saw that, and what they're doing. Obviously, Nvidia have been the big players and big winners out of a lot of what's happening at that sort of chip side of things, and how they've developed, I guess, some of the largest and most powerful AI chips, and just what that means. And so they, I don't know if you saw what they announced. You could probably talk about it better than I can, but in terms of what they're doing and what that impact would be for in Nvidia's stranglehold. What do you think about what they're doing? They have these big.
I think Nvidia is in the beginning of its monopoly, like monopoly curve. Think about it like a monopoly emerges, then everybody starts attacking it, and over a period of 10, 20 years, it either breaks either through regulatory pressure, competition, or platform shifts. I think Nvidia is at the beginning of that wave. I think Nvidia is going to be the dominant actor in that for a good while. And it's not just that they have a better chip. Someone can come up with a different chip. It's just they have the ecosystem. They have and how do you achieve an ecosystem in tech? You get developers to build to your spec, which is your language, right? And they have the Coda language. We talked about it. We talked about it in previous episode. And Nvidia is basically dominating because of that. So they can move fast on the hardware level, and they have the developer ecosystem around the languages and libraries. So I think that, again, they will grow in dominance and grow in size. That doesn't mean there's no business opportunity in their competition, investing in them for sure. But that's my expectation. So I expect Nvidia dominance to, take a while, and they say empires die slowly. I think it will take definitely a while between someone unseats them. Look at Intel; took 30 years.
Yeah, but we do have some of these newer companies, like I say, Cerebras. They're claiming they have the world's fastest AI inference service to reduce the time for AI models to process. What's your thoughts on some of these sorts of companies, though, being able to take some of that away? Or are you saying, look, Nvidia is so far ahead in terms of what they're doing? Sure, these companies will start to make inroads, but yeah.
Sorry, how's it going to play out? So if I'm owning a server farm that trains insane amount of AI, where do I fit your new capabilities? Is it in the software stack or in the hardware stack?
The hardware, I believe that they're primarily hardware, right? So the question is, how can this performance, how can the requirements, when we're looking, how can that performance improve? I think these guys have a pretty next level of performance, is what they're saying. So they have an edge over other AI hardware providers. So they don't just provide faster processing, but also the cost and accessibility of that technology.
But does it require so think about the market for people who buying those Nvidia chips at the end of the day it's not a mass market, meaning it's not a consumer product. It's not an enterprise product. It's this, a few hundred customers in the world that are at that scale. And those relationships are already established. So if you're getting into that, like if Amazon is building a new data center, compute center. I don't know how to call these things anymore. It's not data center, a compute center. What's the, so do they need to start reconfiguring the hardware, the way they lay out with new chips? Is that how it's going to go to the market?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that in this case, it might be large companies that they might try something like Cerebras to save time and money, and smaller companies might just stick with Nvidia. I think the thing here is, are enterprises willing to change their engineering processes to work with these new chip, with this new sort of way of working that Cerebras are offering? So I think it's interesting. It is like having, people develop on Windows. Majority of solutions are on Windows, and are people willing to change and move to another platform? And so I think I think it was just interesting to sort of see how that works. And I think what they're trying to do as well is to work with people like Microsoft and Amazon and so forth. So we'll see if in time if they'll take some of that market share of Nvidia.
Look, there's the dominant force right now, and the insurgency, right? So who's charging ahead with the insurgency? Actually, oddly, it's Facebook. It's Zuckerberg, right? So I expect something interesting might happen there, right? So it's in whose interest is to open source this market, to make it available to everyone, right? It's not just the weights layer or the software layer, it's also the hardware layer. And I would be paying attention to what Zook is doing in that category. In the big providers, the hardware, the data center providers, of course, they have an interest in in better hardware, the better better output, really better capabilities, but they're also locked in with their vendors. And I don't know if Cerebras or not. I'm not an expert. I'll do some more homework for next time. But the question I've got in my mind is that means that do I just bolt it on to my existing stack, or is that a re-architecture? And if it's a re-architecture, it's a cost, and you're gonna die.
I think that's what the big question is. Interestingly, I had a meeting in Sydney yesterday with a provider, a hardware provider. I haven't talked to you about that, but once again, wanting to work with early stage AI companies that are going to progress, and they want them to start using their hardware, which uses a whole range of things in there, and acknowledging that they want to get involved at that, with the companies as they're growing, and people are just trying to get people onto their infrastructure. I think that's the game we're at right now. We're seeing that with all of the bigger hyperscalers and so forth. So, but let's move on to something else.
I've got one. So Google is finally re-releasing their Imagen, sorry, top tier image model. If you remember the controversy a few months ago, where you ask it to take a picture of the founding fathers of America, for example, and it would generate politically correct, multicolor, multiracial pictures of the founding fathers of America. So clearly they needed to rethink that, what the hell. So apparently they are re-releasing it hopefully soon. And, I expect those kind of quirks, early quirks, I expect them to be, old news, a bit of hiccups along the lines of how do we commercialize this technology safely. But it definitely is generating headlines and make it like, subject for news. But interestingly, close to home for me, that the Google is partnering with OpenStax to show textbooks content inside Gemini, and that's exciting because I don't know if you know about OpenStax. OpenStax is essentially an initiative to do open source books, right? Traditionally, there's publishers of books. I'm talking about textbooks. I'm talking about higher education textbooks that cost $300 a course. Those ones. Biology, chemistry, physics, all those ones that students have to buy every year. That's kind of been in my previous life, that's been kind of the subject matter world we were in, trying to unseat those publishers in a way, innovate with new, learning models and new content repositories and so forth. Then this AI, Gen AI comes along, and everybody go, wow, I can just ask the AI to teach me something. And then you actually try that, and Khan Academy did a really cool demo of Camingo, they call it. Yeah. And it's kind of good, but is it good enough? We don't know. It still takes time in the education space. You've got a product until you actually product use in classrooms. That can take a decade and sometimes never happen. So, but I think that's really interesting because we have this open source repositories of books, of content called OpenStax. But they are like PDF, they're not PDF, but they're websites, they're text. Now, if we can train an AI on that, and Google seems to be doing that, then that is potentially a game changer in the ability of large language model to be a true, personal tutor for every student. Not a hypothetical one, but an actual one that will help them to pass an exam in whatever it is they're studying next week. And I think that's super exciting, and I want to see how that comes along. And I won't place my bets of whether or not it makes it to the classrooms, because that will show me as maybe a skeptic. But I'm definitely excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, look, I think Google are well placed. I think some of the earlier discussion we had around, I think they've got a bit of a lot of things happening. I was sitting watching TV yesterday. My I'm not even going to tell you what I was watching, but it's free to air. And it was something to do with some music shows, but let's leave it at that. But on there was non-stop Google ads around how they're using Gemini, how Gemini is popping up in this way, and this way, and this way. And you can see that I think they have got a bit of a rocket up their bum to adapt quickly and change. And I think that's a reflection in the model. I think, probably letting go of it's not always right and owning it and then just getting on with it is important.
I mean, it's not always right, as opposed to what? Wikipedia, that's always right? As opposed to what? As opposed that the New York Times is always right? Which one is always right? Who's always right?
But I think you just got to own it. You got to own it and go, okay, this is what we're doing. We learn from this is what we go on, and this is the same thing for any company we work with us. You don't always get it right, and this technology is moving so quickly. You got to keep trying experiments. They won't always be right. Now the thing is, it's not acceptable to do that where people are going to die, but it is acceptable where people might get an image that's wrong, and sure, it might not be fully appropriate. We've got to kind of learn from that and build. And I think so. One of the things I think I was just about to say is that what I'm seeing in the Google Classroom, for example, point of view is I think teachers are able to tell if people are pasting things from large language models in, or things are done in a different way now because students are able to generate information. If large volumes of text are always being pasted. Now, I don't know if that was there before, but the learning process and how AI and LLMs are being used, I think is really interesting to see in learning what is really the next mode of how we assess someone knows something as well will be really interesting, because with pretty little knowledge, you can come up with something pretty good in a classroom environment. Is that good or is that bad? Does someone really know? Are we going to determine? So I think this whole area is going to be really interesting, and it's good to see that leveraging that will make it even better. I think there was an interesting thing around Anthropic. I don't know if you saw what they released recently around their transparency and I guess full disclosure. We've got a little bit of investment in Anthropic as well, but one of the reasons we invested in Anthropic was that we felt that out of the large language models, they have a bit more of a transparency and explainability in the black box approach of a lot of the models. They've tried to address it. I think that's where they've sort of started off with. So, what they've released is around the system prompts for their model Claude, and how how that works. And often people are jailbreaking that and trying to explain how the models works, how the prompts work. And I think they've in some ways beaten those jailbreakers to their own game. But I think it's really great because they're showing transparency and release notes around how each one of these models are working, and how each one. So Sonnet and Opus and Haiku are their three versions, but really around like how the model handles controversial topics. So how they handle that with care. So how they present information explicitly, and so it's sort of related to that the Google image generation, which was not exactly as you'd expect it to, but just how they label sensitive information and how they avoid filtering phrases and so forth. What's your take on their approach and transparency? And is that what do you think about what they're doing there?
Look, it's this war between the open source community and the closed source community. It's been raging since the dawn of software, and that's just the next battle, isn't it? So around the AI systems, how much are we opening, and so there's this. Meta are saying that they open source models, but actually it's called now. But actually, if you look at it, they're not opening the source; they're opening the weights. All right. So then there's a conversation. There's this argument whether you can't do the idea of open source is that you should be able to not just use the software, but inspect the source and change it and reuse it. Open weights doesn't do anything for that. You can't go and manually change weights. Okay, so it's just basically it's an open model. They're calling it open source, but so you could so that They want everybody to use models as opposed to to create a lock-in for some big, their competitors, the big tech companies. So fine, good, but it's not open source. So then you see, Claude is one-upping them and saying, we're gonna not only open the weights, but actually I'm not sure, is Anthropic open weights? No.
So they're sort of so they're kind of doing this hybrid of, I guess, making it not totally a black box in there, but giving enough information where people can understand how, some of the nuances of how they're doing things. So with their prompts.
So if they're not open in any sense, are they?
They're not open, but they do want to have that transparency around how it works and safety around that a bit more.
But okay, but it's okay, fine. So what I'm saying is that by doing that, it's like a token. I think it's a token gesture to the open source community, and it's supposed to maybe alleviate some concerns or whatever. And if you read the actual content of what they opened, it's basically a page and a half long of text. That's pretty much it. It's the system instruction that the LLM gets before it gets your query. Maybe we need to do a little intro of how LLMs actually work under the scene, because it's not as complex as people. I mean, it's amazing, and but it's not. It's simple to understand. So the LLM gets this. Hey, here's what the user says. What you auto-complete it from here, and because of its training, it's actually able to do something intelligent. But before that, there's like a bit of text that you feed into the LLM, and then it goes open is what that text is, and it says literally, you are Claude, you are an open large language model, you should strive to be neutral, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you autocomplete from that start, a large language model is able to come up with, the responses you see. So they just open source that.
So one of the things around Anthropic and Claude is really around their constitutional AI. And so they have this big constitution around how it's trained and how this sort of reinforcement learning works with the model. So in theory, it's a more, I guess, has a more safer way of the way that it's trained, and they have this sort of learning around what they believe is in the constitution. So they don't have people manually doing things in there, but they do have this constitution around helping it supervise, what happens within the model. So I think that's one of the big things, and the big basis of where they started with their models was around having this constitutional AI.
I never really quite understand what's the constitution. What is it actually, this concept?
So from what I understand, it's really around they have this constitution around. So rather than having this human oversights around the list of rules and principles, they have this they have this constitution. I don't know what's exactly in that. It's probably worthwhile reading one of the papers in more detail around what's in the constitution. It's really around providing a more safer models that have things that are in there that are trained in a way that is.
Here's the thing: if you want the LLM to avoid harmful content, all right?
Yep.
So the question becomes, who decides what's a harmful content? If you're an extremist of any type, you would have an opinion about what harmful content is, and it becomes a question of like, which values should the LLM, if Google's response to show me the pictures of the founding fathers is that it shows you a racially diverse picture instead of the accuracy of the actual information, that someone's value in that process that it came to be that nonsense is that somehow not hurting a diversity opinion in the viewing is more important than historical accuracy or something like that.
Yeah. 100%.
So how do you approach that problem? So they are coming up like with the idea of a constitutional AI, which is like instead of having humans doing that, come up with like a model that does that and have a way to understand it and inspect it, and so forth and so on. I think that's basically what they were trying to do, to say that the only oversight you give is you provide the rules, as opposed to you sit and say, yeah, that's offensive, that's not offensive, that's good, that's not good. Because you're going to bake those opinions into the response of the LLM.
Explain that way better than I did. Yes, exactly.
So you know why it is?
Why?
It's because I've got a PhD in AI.
That's right. Yeah, that's what that does. Cool.
All right, moving on. There's 3 little news items I think are worth looking at. So I think OpenAI at 100 billion valuation. That's a good one. I think OpenAI is going to be one of those next trillion-dollar companies. That's my bet right now. I'm hearing that Alexa is going to use Anthropic Claude to power their hardware. So you remember Alexa that you talk to, but actually all you
Well,
really
she just went. She just actually, when as soon as you said that, beeped in my
is
room.
Alexa listening. Alexa, set up my alarm clock to 5 a.m.
Alarm set for 5 a.m. tomorrow.
Thanks for that. Good thing I get up then.
And and you know we still Cursor is still the AI kind of IDE, the integrated development environment that powered by AI basically is making a whole lot of noise still on Twitter. A lot of developers are realizing that the language is now English. You type what you want to happen, and then you have to inspect code and see that it actually works. But that's like you can move way faster than the usual way of coding. And I think it shows how marketing and coding are definitely areas where Gen AI has product market fit, and I think there's a lot more coming. But those are early, really killer apps of this technology.
So, just one thing on that. What's your take on Microsoft and Apple funding this round for OpenAI, and any implications around that? What do you think?
It's oligopoly. How do you say it?
Oligopoly? Or are you saying no?
Yeah, it's oligopoly. Basically, you've got this 5 to 10 tech giants. Sometimes we say 5, sometimes we say 6. Depends on the stock or whatever. But you got these massive tech companies, and they're pretty much fighting each other, but they're frenemies. But they have to keep away from regulatory, regulation. But it's basically oligopoly, and I'm not surprised that they are like paying for it, because who else can pay this kind of sums, right? That's the amazing thing in this new technology, is that it's requires insane amount of money to train and run those data centers, and they're investing in that. So
yeah, who would have thought Microsoft and Apple are going to be buddies? Hey,
that's kind of the popular perception. No, that's always been the popular perception, but actually they've been staying off each other's. It's in both of their interests too that the other thrive, for reasons of anti-competitive kind of regulatory.
Yeah, and I think they're actually carved out not very different, but different enough businesses that they don't tread on each other's toes as much when we're talking about hardware, or we're talking about they don't have Microsoft doesn't have phones now. That's one of the big plays around Apple and that whole ecosystem, and they're not they don't have the gaming and the cloud like they do at that level.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that sort of naturally carved itself out based on what they do. So yeah.
I agree. I just wouldn't use the word naturally.
All right, let's wrap this up. I think that's been a good week. That's another week in AI. Thanks for joining us. If you ever want to raise some topics, send us some messages around what you want us to cover. Love to hear more feedback around where we're going. But thanks so much for joining us. And if you do find this interesting, like, subscribe, and please do share any of these videos. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.